Recently, I came up with a brilliant idea, the kind of idea that could work, but absolutely doesn't have to make any sense. And before you ask, I know we're on a hardcore server. Long story short, a bit of chaos happened, and just ignore it. Anyway, in World of Warcraft, I've always loved the Death Knight, a class added in Wrath of the Lich King. And while I adore Vanilla, I really miss my favorite class, and Goblins too, if we are being honest. So I decided to try creating a Proto-Death Knight in Vanilla WoW. The Warlock is pretty much the perfect base for this experiment, except for one tiny obstacle: race restrictions. I refused to pick a gnome for personal reasons, so I ended up choosing an orc, which honestly fits the whole theme surprisingly well. The general idea is simple: a male-oriented warlock who keeps pressure with dots, backed by extra DPS from our summoned demon. Does it make any sense? Will it even work? No clue, but I'm excited to find out. As always, everything began in the Valley of Trials. I grabbed every quest I could and rushed to leave the zone as fast as possible. Not because there's something wrong with it, but I've spent the last few months miserably failing hardcore attempts, and pretty much all of my journeys have started right here. I've seen this place enough for one lifetime. Reality hit me immediately. Turning my warlock into a male brawler from level 1 doesn't work. The base damage from my dagger was absolutely pathetic. So for the first few levels I'll be playing him the traditional way, and maybe poking a few enemies with my weapon just to level it, though that barely makes sense since my end goal is to learn one-handed swords anyway. At least the quest went smoothly. The same quest that used to haunt me in my dreams. Waking up lazy pawns or collecting cactus apples. I even managed to help another player who clearly hadn't mastered the ancient art of parkour, and together we took down Yarok inside the Burning Blade cave. At this stage my biggest source of DPS was still my imp. He had barely any mana and his health bar looked like a joke, but the little guy hit surprisingly hard. Immolate on the other hand wasn't exactly pulling its weight, but for now it had to do. After wrapping up most of the quests in Valley of Trials, I hit level 5 and headed straight to Warlock Trainer to finally learn Corruption, the spell that would be my main damage dealer for quite a while. It deals a total of 40 damage over 12 seconds, roughly 13 per tick. With that secured, I left the Valley of Trials, determined to learn how to wield a sword as soon as possible. On my way to the right trainer, I stopped in Razor Hill to turn in a quest and set my halfstone there, meaning I could return instantly to Dorota once I was ready to resume questing, and headed straight for my favorite starting zone in all of classic World of Warcraft, Tirisfal Glades. I came here mainly for one specific ability you can only learn in Undercity, but that required 10 silver coins. So while I was here, I accepted every quest I could find in Brill and set out on a temporary vacation from Dorota. Turns out this was a mistake. The undead mobs in this area are way tankier than anything I fought so far, and they hit noticeably harder. That's when another idea struck me. Since most of these enemies are humanoids, they drop cloth. With cloth, I could craft the armor I desperately needed, and even make bags. So I trained tailoring and went back into the fray. After a few fights, I started doubting the decision to come here so early. No Durotar quest completed, no decent gear, and definitely no backup plan. Fighting these mobs felt like hitting a wall. and they chunked me harder than I like to admit. But I kept going, convinced that once I swapped to swords, everything would magically improve, in theory. While heading back towards the undead starting point, I ran into Gordo, who gave me a quest to collect gloom weeds. Shortly after, I almost died, when one dog I pulled somehow dragged two more with it. They shredded my imp instantly and then chased me down like I was the last fresh corpse in Tirisfal. Thankfully, a passing guard stepped in and saved me at the last second. Technically, death doesn't matter here. Like I said, I didn't plan on playing hardcore, but since I accidentally ended up on hardcore server, I'm trying to respect the rules, because who knows, maybe this will be the character that finally makes it to level 60. I finally managed to finish the task of killing the rotting dead, and I even took down two of them at once, which honestly felt impossible at this stage. I returned to Brill, turned in the first buff of quests, and dinged level 6 that unlocked a couple more missions in town, which I grabbed immediately. After selling whatever junk I had left, I was already past the halfway mark toward buying the skill I needed, but learning the skill meant nothing without a weapon to actually use it with, and that was definitely out of my price range. I trained tailoring a bit using the cloth I had collected and headed back out. This time the target was the pack of dogs that nearly ended my run earlier, but now the tables had turned and I was the threat. Next on the list were the gnolls, and for a moment everything actually felt easier, and then out of nowhere one of them dropped the most basic one-handed sword imaginable, which meant I finally had a sword waiting for me once I actually learned the weapon skill. Everything looked like it was going well until the gnolls reminded me how wrong I was, and I almost died again. Realizing how weak I still was and how questionable this entire idea might be, I decided to skip the attempt at killing Maggot Eye for now. I finished the gnoll questline, turned everything in, and purposely didn't pick up any new quests, at least for the moment. I sold the rest of my unneeded items and headed straight to Undercity. I also checked the auction house on the way, and yeah, everything was way out of my budget. But at least I finally bought the ability to wield one-handed swords, and from that moment on, I hoped things would finally start to look up. I returned to Razor Hill and began attacking anything I could find to level my sword skill. At the start, I couldn't hit a barn door, but every successful swing gave me progress. I was hoping that sooner or later I'd be able to deal some respectable damage. Spoiler, not really, but that's mostly because this sword was absolute trash. Still, I was grateful to have it. At least I was gaining the weapon skill I'd need later when a decent blade finally drops. While clearing out the Kultiras invaders, I found myself facing an important question. Fight or run? And yes, I ran, with the hope that someday soon I'll come back and deal with them properly. I came back to Razor Hill at level 8 and bought Curse of Agony, another damage overtime spell, just like Corruption. This should help a lot at this stage. I also picked up the second rank of Shadow Bolt, upgraded my Imp's Fireball and Totem Blood Pact, giving me a whole +2 stamina. I needed money for a proper sword, so grabbed the Harpy quest near Orgrimmar. Surprisingly, they were much easier to kill than I expected. Of course, most of the damage still came from my Imp and my spells, but watching a warlock desperately try to fight in melee had its charm. After spending every penny I'd earned, I bought a slightly better sword and moved on to the second part of the Harpy quests. And honestly, the combat started to feel smoother with every fight. I realized that if I managed to get even decent gear and right skills, this whole idea might actually work. Even if only in a roleplay sense, it would still be awesome. A big bonus was the fact that harpies are humanoids, which means more cloth. And cloth means more gear and more backspace. So in between fights, I was crafting whatever scraps I had into something usable. Eventually, I finished the Harpy quest, this time relying entirely on magic. I reached level 9 and returned to the goblin who sent me there. None of the rewards were useful, so I took the most expensive one to sell. And that's where today's journey ends. Because next time, we hit level 10, spend our first talent points and attempt our very first dungeon, where I hope to grab an item that technically shouldn't belong to a warlock, but that's the story for the next episode. See you then.